Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. There's something my girlfriend doesn't want me to see. Cassie and I have been dating for 5 months. Only lately has it occurred to me. I can't recall a single time we spent time together during the day. We met on Hinge. Her profile picture had her crouched outside a stone church after what looked like a night out drinking. Her skin was porcelain white, and she had sharp, cat-like eyes that seemed to stare straight through the screen. I'd started hundreds of chats that went nowhere, so when Cassie asked if I want to go to dinner, I said yes without hesitation. We met at a bar and quickly acquainted ourselves with the liquor menu. Her smile widened with each glass of champagne. I ordered crab ragout. She ordered a large ribeye. Cassie was a self-certified carnivore and had red meat for almost every meal. The steak was cooked on the rare side of medium rare, and when she sawed into it, fat spots of blood sweated onto her plate. It spread until the whole plate was pink. She dragged a forkful of mashed potato through it like she was painting. Then she licked each tine clean individually. It made me queasy to watch. I'd even asked her if she wanted me to send it back to the kitchen for a few more minutes on the grill, but she told me not to worry. She preferred it that way. After that first dinner, there were many more as we tried different restaurants around the city. Her shift work was from morning to evening, and she seemed to work every day, so we'd meet at night mostly out of convenience. Looking back, I can't remember her ever talking about what she actually does at work. Some nights, when we were out late, she'd stay at mine. I always sleep with the blinds open as I like waking to the sunlight. But when Cassie stayed, I'd wake up in the dark with my 6 o'clock alarm clock screaming at me from the side table. The blinds would be cinched together with safety pins. When I asked her about it, she just scolded me. Do you have any idea how much it hurts? Where the sun touched her, a thin strip down her left cheek. The skin was red like sunburn. Outside of that, it was almost perfect. I never noticed how strange things were until she moved in with me. It wasn't a permanent change. Cassie's apartment was built below ground level, and after days of heavy rain, water started seeping to the concrete flooring. The whole building smelled like wet cardboard. I did the gentlemanly thing and offered her a place to stay while the damages were repaired. I thought she'd jump at the chance, a trial run for what I hoped would end with us living together. But she just looked nervous, like she was searching for an excuse. All she did was politely shake her head with a "Mum." There were no drastic changes at first. As always, I'd leave for work while Cassie was still stretched out in bed, and I'd come home at night to find her cooking steak, sausages, or pork chops. She usually had me do the shopping, but occasionally she'd make late-night food runs to the grocery store and come back with a bag of something like ground beef. I never really thought about what she did while I wasn't in the apartment. I trusted her enough to know she wasn't going to rob me or snoop through my stuff. It wasn't until I remembered the cameras. I'd set them up years ago for my cat, Oscar, so I could record him climbing the cat tower and post a montage of the clips on TikTok. Oscar had suddenly run away a few months back, but the cameras were still there. I just hadn't checked them. So, on my lunch break, I logged into the app and tried connecting to the bedroom cam. It still worked, and there she was, Cassie, dead asleep. I remember her specifically telling me how busy she was going to be at work that day due to a new project she'd been saddled with. I skimmed the footage back, and for hours she lay so still I couldn't tell if she was breathing. The bedroom cam caught a glimpse of the street, and I could see cars passing by. So I knew it wasn't frozen. Cassie hadn't mentioned anything about taking a day off. With how much she worked, she'd made it sound like the whole place would collapse without her. When I got home, I asked how her day was, and all I got was fine. Throughout the rest of the week, I kept checking cameras, just here and there, to see if she ever left the apartment or even got out of bed. But no, she literally never left. Every day, she didn't move until 5 p.m., just as it was getting dark. She'd pull back the covers, stiffly rise, and then head to the kitchen to start cooking our dinner. She isn't freeloading. She has been paying for all my groceries as a thank you for letting her crash here. Maybe she's rich. Maybe she's won the lottery. Maybe she just doesn't trust me enough yet to explain. Last night, I accidentally grabbed a plant-based burger patty instead of the real thing. She sniffed it once, then slid the plate back toward me, saying she wasn't hungry. Hours later, I woke to the sound of the mattress shifting and then the fridge door sucking open. After a moment, the door clicked shut and I heard the slow crinkle of plastic. That's when I realized she was elbow deep in the bin, digging for the leftover meat I'd thrown away days ago. She hasn't mentioned a word of this to me. Whenever I try to ask her about it, she shifts the conversation to a completely different topic. All I want to ask her is why I can smell the scraps of meat she missed in the trash, and why does the thought of sucking them clean makes my mouth water. Story 2. The campsite I found in the woods was perfect. Too perfect. I'm writing this from a motel because I had to leave my tent behind. I need to write this down. I need to get out of my head and into the world. Because I feel like I'm going crazy, and because I need to warn people. I'm an experienced hiker. I'm not one of those weekend warriors who sticks to the paved, well-marked trails. I like the deep woods, the places where you can walk for a whole day and not see another soul. I had a long weekend, so I decided to tackle a remote trail in a state forest a few hours from my home. My plan was simple: hike it about 5 or 6 miles, find a good spot, camp a night, and hike out the next day. Standard stuff. The hike, it was beautiful. The air was crisp, the sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, and the late autumn sun cast long, golden shafts of light through the canopy. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the fallen leaves, the chatter of a distant sparrows, and the wind whispering through the trees. This is why I do it. This feeling of absolute peace, of being completely disconnected from the noise of the world. After a few hours of steady hiking, I started looking for a place to make camp. I was looking for the usual, a relatively flat spot, not too close to the trail, preferably with access to a water source. And then I found it. It wasn't just a good spot. It was a perfect spot, unnaturally perfect. I stepped off the main trail, pushing through a thicket of ferns, and found myself in a clearing I can only describe as idyllic. It was a perfect circle, maybe 40 feet in diameter. The ground was covered in a carpet of short, soft, vibrant green grass that looked more like a meticulously manicured lawn than a patch of wild forest floor. And the trees formed a perfect, unbroken ring around the clearing. Tall, ancient oaks and pines stood shoulder to shoulder, their branches interlocking overhead like some kind of dome, leaving this single, perfect circle of green open to the sky. It was like something out of fairy tale. A small, rational part of my brain registered how strange it was. Clearings in dense forests are rarely so symmetrical. The grass shouldn't be so uniform, so soft. But the overwhelming feeling was one of discovery, of incredible luck. It felt safe, protected. The circle of trees felt like a natural fence, a private room gifted to me by the forest itself. I dismissed my unease as my city dweller's cynicism. I had found the jackpot of campsites. I dropped my pack with contented sigh and set to work. The tent went up easily, the stakes sinking into the soft earth with a satisfying thump. I gathered some fallen branches from just outside the clearing and built a small, neat fire pit in the center. Soon, a cheerful little fire was crackling away, warding off the evening chill. I cooked a simple meal of dehydrated chili and sat on my log, watching the flames dance as the sun set, painting the sky above the circle of trees in hues of orange and purple. This, I thought to myself, is perfect. This is what it's all about. As true darkness fell, the forest changed, as it always does. The familiar woods of the day became a strange place of shadows and unseen movements. But I was snug in my little circle of light and warmth. I felt completely secure. After cleaning up my cook set, I doused the fire thoroughly, making sure every last ember was out, and crawled into my tent. I zipped up the flap, settled into my sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. And that's when the perfection started to unravel. It began with a feeling, a strange sensation from the ground beneath me. It was a faint, almost imperceptible movement directly under my sleeping bag. It felt like insects, a whole lot of them, moving around just under the tent floor. A low-grade, creepy crawly feeling. I tried to ignore it. I'm in the woods. After all, there are bugs. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me and closed my eyes, focusing on the gentle sounds of night. But I couldn't sleep. The feeling persisted, a constant, subtle, wriggling sensation against my back. It wasn't painful. It was just wrong. Then the noises started. They came from outside the tent, from the ring of trees surrounding the clearing. A soft snap of a twig, the dry rustle of leaves. At first, I assumed it was just an animal. A deer, maybe a raccoon. But the sounds were too regular. Snap, rustle, snap. They seemed to be moving slowly around the perimeter of the clearing, like someone is moving around me in the darkness. My heart started to beat a little faster. I lay there, perfectly still, my ears straining in the darkness. And then I saw the shadows. My tent is made of a thin, light-colored nylon. The moon was bright, and it cast eerie, dancing shadows of the tree branches onto the tent walls. I watched them, try to calm my racing mind. It's just the wind, I told myself. The wind is making the branches move. But there was no wind. The air was dead still. Yet the shadows on my tent walls were moving, not just swaying, but actively, deliberately shifting. They were long, thin, finger-like shadows, and they were stroking the outside of my tent. I could see them sliding up the walls, tracing the seams like curious, probing fingers. I sat bolt upright, my breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my powerful flashlight from the mesh pocket beside me. My hand was shaking. I flicked it on, pointing the bright, white beam at the tent wall. The shadow vanished in the glare. I swept the beam around the inside of the tent. Nothing. Just me, my gear, and my hammering heart. I turned the light off. The shadow fingers returned, caressing the thin fabric. I was terrified now. The feeling from the ground had intensified. It wasn't just a vague wriggling anymore. It was faster, more deliberate. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles tapping against the floor of the tent from underneath. I fumbled for flashlight again, my hands slick with sweat, and pointed the beam down at the tent floor beside my sleeping bag. And I saw it. The grass had come through. Dozens of thin, blade-like shoots of the soft green grass had pierced the thick nylon floor of my tent. They were sticking up maybe half an inch, like a patch of freshly sprouted lawn. But that wasn't the worst part. They were moving. They were swaying back and forth in perfect, horrifying unison. Swish, swish, swish. A tiny, hypnotic, rhythmic motion. They weren't just blades of grass. They were something else. Cilia, teeth, feelers. They were testing the air inside my tent. They were trying to find me. I screamed, then scrambled for the zipper of the tent door, my fingers feeling like useless, clumsy sausages. The sound of the zipper was obscenely loud in the silence. I burst out of the tent and stumbled to my feet in the center of the clearing, whipping the beam of my flashlight around wildly. The clearing was empty. The circle of trees stood silent and still. For a moment, a sliver of hope, of denial, cut through my panic. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I had finally lost it. Then I turned the flashlight back on my tent, and the world fell out from under me. The tree branches weren't coming from the trees. They were coming from the ground. Dozens of thick, dark, root-like tendrils, the color of wet earth, had erupted from the soft green grass of the clearing. They were wrapped around my tent, constricting it, squeezing it like a giant boa constrictor. The sleek dome of my tent was misshapen, buckled inwards under the pressure. The roots were fibrous and sinewy, and I could swear I saw them pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a network of dark veins. They were pulling the tent downwards into the soft earth, which seemed to be yielding, sinking. It looked like my tent was being eaten, digested, and in that moment of absolute soul-shattering horror, I understood. I didn't think. I didn't grab my pack. I didn't try to save my expensive gear. My phone, my wallet, they were all in the tent. A tent that was currently being swallowed by the ground. The only thing I had was the flashlight in my hand and the clothes on my back. I ran. I ran for the gap in the trees that led back to the trail, my feet pounding on the soft, living earth. I felt a strange, sucking sensation with every step, as if the ground itself was trying to hold me back. I crashed through the ferns and onto the hard-packed dirt of the trail, and I didn't stop. The run through the forest was a blur of pure animal panic. The beam of my flashlight bounced and jittered, illuminating a chaotic, terrifying slideshow of dark tree trunks, twisted roots, and gaping black shadows. Every rustle of leaves was a creature, its tendrils slithering after me. Every shadow was its gaping maw. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire, until my legs were jelly, until I was sobbing and gasping for air. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it, a glint of reflected light through the trees. My car, the sight of that familiar, man-made object, was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I burst out of the woods and into the small, gravel parking area, fumbling in my pocket for the spare key I always keep there. My hands were shaking so violently it took me 3 tries to get it into the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there for a moment, my chest heaving, listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing. I jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. A beautiful, beautiful sound of civilization and escape. I didn't look back. I drove all night, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, not stopping until the sun was up, and I was hundreds of miles away. I'm safe now, I guess. I'm in a cheap motel room. But I'm not okay. I close my eyes and I see it. The wiggling grass, the pulsing, dark roots, the way my tent buckled and sank into the earth. I think the clearing wasn't a clearing. It was a thing, a living thing. The soft grass wasn't grass. It was a lure, the soft lining of a mouth. The perfect circle of trees wasn't a protective fence. It was the rim of the jaw, and I had willingly, happily set up my camp on its tongue. Story 3. I found a child drowned in a wheat field. The man smiled, reaching once more for the bottle in front of him. He raised it to his lips, taking a long swig and wiping the foam from the corners of his unkempt mustache before turning once more to me. After half an hour of conversation, it appeared as though something I had said to man had finally stirred up some interest. You mentioned a theophany. What's that? The gruff man asked. I reached down to his travel bag and wiped the still fresh dust from its buckles before pulling out a Bible. Yes, sir, a theophany. It's not a word strictly associated with Jesus, but we mostly use it to describe times in the Old Testament when it's believed the Lord appeared in a physical form before he was born in Bethlehem. Are you familiar with the story of Jacob, how he wrestled with God? The man took another sip from his rapidly emptying bottle, nodding wordlessly as he did so. Well, that's a theophany. We know he struggled with a man until morning, when the man revealed himself to be the Lord, or an angel of the Lord. Anyhow, a lot of scholars believe that mentions of the angel of the Lord are Jesus himself anyways. What do you think? I studied his expression for any sign of interest. I had visited towns where hardly a soul could tell the difference between Moses and Noah, but had never yet met a man like the bulky, haggard figure beside me who already seemed not only immensely knowledgeable of Scripture, but wholly uninterested. The man shifted in his chair, scratching his roughened chin before calling the bartender over for another beer. After several moments of silence, he spoke once again to me. The original language refers to the man as Elohim, which many translate to mean Big G God. Elohim really just means a god, a heavenly being. I think it was an angel he wrestled with. Not that ain't impressive. Mind you, the man took another sip of beer. What about at the burning bush? I raised an eyebrow. What about it? Well, just a thought, I guess. I met someone a few years back. Real smart fella. He told me he believed that when Moses spoke to God to the burning bush, he was talking to Jesus. Same thing when God comforted Elijah on the mountain, that it was Jesus. Well, in a way, yes, we hold Jesus and the Father to be two distinct persons, but both the same God. The man chuckled. No, I mean like they were speaking to Christ himself after he was born. When Jesus went up on the mountain for the transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appeared with him and they talked to him, right? He thought maybe, since God is bigger than time, he could be both then and now all at once. His idea was that when they appear in the New Testament, it's the same conversation that he's having with each of them back in the Old Testament too. I furrowed my brow, leaning back into my chair. That's a unique thought. I don't know how much water it holds scripturally, but I must say it's creative at least. The two of us sat in silence for a while, content not to trouble each other any longer with speculation or trivia. It was late into the evening then, and more weary patrons had begun to stumble into the small bar, tired from a long day's labor. Not long after the last beams of orange sunlight slipped through the shuttered blinds, a small commotion began outside. I heard shouting and the screech of tires, and after a few seconds, the wooden front door burst open with clatter. A man, disheveled and sweating, took a second to lean against the doorframe. His face was red and glistening, and he was deeply out of breath after collecting himself. He looked across the room towards two elderly police officers who had been hunched playing cards at a small table. I recognized the elder of the two to be the sheriff, a man named Emerson with whom I'd made acquaintance that afternoon. The red-faced man at the entrance called out to the sheriff and his deputy. The distinct twang of panic caught between his haggard breaths. They found him, Sheriff. The McBride boy. They found him out in the field. The sheriff had already begun to put on his coat, moving quickly toward the exit. I sat in my seat, watching the situation unfold for several moments before realizing that every other person in the small room was also rushing out the door. I turned my head to my burly drinking partner, expecting in him the same urgency, but found instead that the man moved slowly. Beneath his rough skin and unkempt beard, his expression was grim as he paid his tab and trudged out the door in pursuit of the curious mob. I collected my things once more into my dusty travel bag and left the bar. Stepping out into the dim moonlight, I looked out across the highway, where the amassing crowd was already tearing through the wheat fields in a frenzy, flashlights in hand, as their red-faced messenger led them onwards. Pennell Crossing was incredibly small back then. The township was entirely bisected by its defining interstate highway from which it clung to tightly. Across the highway to the west, where I now faced, were the majority of the local farms. When I had rode into town on the Greyhound bus that morning, I thought that in the blistering sunlight, the fields of wheat and corn seemed infinite in their breadth, stretching out into nothingness. On the eastern side, the small collection of stores, bars, and municipal buildings arranged themselves as almost a perfect row along the side of the highway. Behind them lay several houses and a few small livestock farms, clustered closely to the rest of the infrastructure. Nested neatly in the middle of it all was a small chapel, once well cared for. Those days were evidently long since past, its white paint chipping and its windows cracked and dusted. It had been the decline of this church culminating with the sudden death of the former pastor that had led to me being sent to Pennell Crossing that very day as the replacement pastor. I spotted the large man slowly making his way across the highway. I hastened my step to catch up, and between panting breaths asked him if he knew the McBride family very well. I didn't know. I'm about as new around here as you are, just passing through. Oh, that explains why you're so well learned on the word. I reckon there ain't a seminary round here for 500 miles. Pardon me. By the way, I never caught your name. My name is Peter. Never went to preaching school, Peter. You can call me Nolan. The pair of us crossed the threshold of the wheat fields, the waist-high stalks of grain trampled under the feet of the crowd preceding us. In the ever-spreading carpet of amber ahead, all sound was muffled amidst the rhythmic rustling of the harvest in the wind. We continued in silence, following the faint lights quickly disappearing ahead further into the fields. Only when the distant wailing of a woman far ahead came to our ears did we quicken our step. When we caught up to the rest, they were clustered frantically around chaotic scene. Ahead, just a few feet, was a large green tractor. It rested at an odd angle, slanted dramatically as though on uneven ground. I looked at its base to find that its back tires lay nearly half submerged in the soil. Oddly, the ground on which it sat lay dry and undisturbed, as though the tires had simply sunken through the solid ground. Its operator, a panicked young man, sat leaning against its dusted metal frame, tears rolling down his tanned face as he spoke between sobbing breaths to the sheriff. I turned my attention away from the tractor to try to see what the crowd circled around. Several men stooped down, struggling to lift the crying woman to her feet. She kept shrugging their arms off, falling back to the ground where she herself seemed to be struggling to pull something out of the soil. As I stepped closer, gently pushing my way through the crowd, I saw the cause of distress, the lifeless body of the McBride child. At initial glance, it appeared as though only the upper half of the boy's body was present. I wondered, with sickening fear, if perhaps the boy had been run over by the tractor. I observed as a woman, whom I would soon learn to be the boy's mother, once again grabbed the child's small arm, trying to lift him up. The realization came that the boy's body, much like the sunken tires of the tractor, was half buried in the soil, with arms and head outstretched as though he had attempted to claw his way out of the dirt. When Mrs. McBride was finally pulled away from her child, Nolan began instructing some of the others to start digging out the boy's body. The red-faced man who had burst into the bar stepped back, eyeing Nolan with curiosity and suspicion before turning to speak to the sheriff. I watched in awe as the boy's body was quickly removed, the soil around his legs collapsing back on itself as though he had simply displaced the earth. Sheriff Emerson walked up beside me, letting out a heavy sigh as the pair watched. "I hope you'll forgive the chaos round here, Reverend." My eyes didn't leave the unfolding scene, watching as the boy's mother swooped in to cradle her son's body. What did the farmhand say? How'd this happen? Poor kid got stuck, hopped out to take a look, and tripped over the boy. Hell of a thing to find. He'll be all right in a few days, though. As Mrs. McBride clung to her child, she hugged his limp body tight, squeezing him. As she did, a sputter of water was pushed out of the boy's lungs, spilling onto the ground. The crowd stepped back in shock as the mother sobbed ever louder. As the last of the water dripped out of the boy's pale lips, my nose curled. In the air, just for a passing moment, a harsh, chemical scent wafted by. It passed nearly as soon as it arrived. Nolan stepped back from the scene, dusting his rough hands off on his coat. I looked at him and saw inklings of teardrops forming in the creased corners of his eyes. Nolan mouthed something to himself in disbelief before turning to me and saying it aloud. He drowned. The boy's funeral was quiet, even for such a little town. I sat silent in the back row, daring not to interrupt the already painfully awkward service. The child had been the youngest of 6. His siblings and mother sat in the front row, their sniffling echoing to the near empty chapel, while their father gave a poorly rehearsed eulogy. I, now technically Penal Crossing spiritual leader, offered to perform the funeral myself. I had been gently declined by the McBride family, who felt the service should be performed by those who had known Benjamin in life, not only in death. Although understanding, I couldn't help but feel the slight sting of rejection from the members of my new congregation. I hoped that these people would soon come to trust me, even amidst the tragedy I emerged into. Within 20 minutes the service was over and the small body was removed to be driven to the burial site, which I also declined to attend to respect the privacy of the mourners. Once the small crowd had tearfully shuffled out, I walked out of the chapel and prayed silently that my next time attending my new place of work would not be another funeral. I crossed a side road, walking over to the dilapidated motel next door to the bar, in which I'd stayed the last few nights, and would likely keep staying in until more permanent residence was made available. Standing outside the bar were Nolan, Sheriff Emerson, and the red-faced man from the bar. The three of them seemed to be deep in a heated discussion, one that I could tell was only intensifying as he made his approach. "I'm sure you had nothing to do with this, Nolan, but you know the bind I'm in. We try to welcome newcomers like yourself here, but if Clark here saw you out in the fields the night the kid was found, I at least have to bring you in for some questions." Nolan crossed his arms firmly, leaning against the wall as I approached. I understand that, Emerson, but we can do that right here. As I understand it, you and the deputy are the only officers in town anyways. So what could it do to bring me into the station? I'll answer any questions you have right here. The red-faced man, Clark, scoffed and turned to protest the sheriff, but was interrupted by me. Excuse me for interrupting y'all, but am I understanding there's some suspicion in the death? I can vouch for Nolan the afternoon the body was found. At least, we were in the bar speaking that evening, and before that he'd been sitting at the bar since about noon. Clark turned to me, his brow furrowed in frustration. He might have been, but I saw him out in those fields the night before that. When the kid went missing, he was just standing out there, a little bit past where the body was found. I looked over to Nolan, who scoffed. I weren't nowhere near there, Sheriff. I can't prove it to you, but maybe you should start asking Clark why he was also out in the fields when the kid went missing, and why he didn't bring it up until now. Clark slammed a shaking fist against the wall where Nolan leaned. Because I, unlike you, live here and work these fields like everyone else. It's my livelihood. You, on the other hand, have barely left the bar since you showed up, except to stand out there in the field at night. You went missing. Sheriff Emerson pulled Clark back away. Nolan, you quit that and calm yourself down. Mr. Carver does bring up a good point. Clark, if you saw him out there that night, why didn't you say anything? It ain't a crime to stand out there. I thought he was a new farmhand. It wasn't until I found out later that he weren't, and that's where the kid was. Had no reason to be suspicious until body was found. Sheriff, I'm telling you, this man's as guilty as sin. I sat back, daring not interrupt once more as the three men continued to argue. Eventually, after some heavy persuasion and the threat of arrest, Nolan agreed to accompany the elderly sheriff back to the station provided Clark did not come with. This left a visibly angry Clark alone with me, feeling extraordinarily awkward and out of place in the situation. The two of us sat in a tense quiet for several minutes, leaning against the wooden walls of the old bar and watching the amber fields sway in the wind across the highway. Finally, I spoke up. Clark, was it? I don't think we've been officially introduced yet. Name's Peter. I'm the new preacher. I know who you are. Clark chuckled between gritted teeth. Ain't no one been here dressed like you since Reverend John died back in May. Well, I'm sorry to have come in the middle of such a troubling time. The death of a child, especially in the way it went, ain't ever easy. Clark's expression softened a bit. It's all right, Peter. It ain't nothing new round here, if I'm honest. Shit happens all the time. Livestock dies, folks die, kids die too. Just the way it goes, I guess. I raised an eyebrow, turning to face him. This happens often? Clark stiffened, looking uncomfortable. Well, it's not always that bad, but yeah, folks out here are pretty used to losing people and not always getting the answers they're wanting. Your buddy, though, Nolan, he's hiding something. Maybe not that he's a killer, but something. If that's something to get the McBride family some of the answers they're hurting for, good. I sat back, thinking for a moment. I wouldn't call him my buddy. You know, I met the man just a few days ago. Clark turned, stepping away from the wall and walking into the bar. Well, then maybe you should be a bit more careful who you vouch for. The next few days were well spent trying to restore the small chapel to some resemblance of a holy place. It was difficult to believe that the decay had crept in so rapidly in the short few months since Reverend John's death. Likely, the paint had been peeling for years, the dust collecting in corners unswept for far too long. I made my best effort to clean every nook and cranny I could get to in the sanctuary before I would bother trying to find the lost key to the back office. It was a sanctuary, after all, where I'd hoped to reunite the congregation of Pennell Crossing in worship. I dusted the windowsills, straightened the hymnals in the backs of pews, and swapped broken light bulbs for new ones. By Friday, the small room was finally in a state that I considered worthy of its purpose. By happenstance, a visitor came to the chapel that same evening. The woman, dressed in a pale blue dress and holding a toddler to her hip, walked through the door while I was collecting my personal effects to begin settling into the back office. I stood up to meet her, holding an outstretched hand to shake her own. The woman looked apprehensively at my hand for a moment, as though debating whether to shake it or not. She shook her head as though clearing some unwanted thought before relinquishing a small smile and introducing herself. "You must be Peter. I'm sorry we haven't had the chance to be introduced yet. I'm Ellen, and this is my son Micah." I smiled back. "It's a pleasure to meet you both, ma'am. I'm just getting things ready for the Sunday service. I wish I'd had the time to clean it up more before the funeral, but in the state it was in," I trailed off, noticing a visual discomfort growing in Ellen's face. "I'm sorry. I'm sure you don't want to hear about the mess or the funeral. What brings you in here today?" Her creased cheeks softened once more, and she used her free hand to fish a set of keys out of her handbag. "I take it you haven't opened the back office yet, but you'll need these to get in. It'll still be locked. I forgot Emerson had them." I hesitantly took the rusted key ring from her hand. "Well, thank you, miss. If you don't mind me asking, why'd Emerson have them?" Her face scrunched with confusion. "Because of the crime scene?" "Crime scene? What crime scene?" Her eyes went wide. No one told you?" She reached out her arm, indicating she wanted the keys. I handed them back and followed her as she led him into the short corridor behind the pulpit, leading to the preacher's office. She set Micah down on the warped wooden floor for a moment while she fidgeted with the key, struggling to fit it into the rusted keyhole. Finally, as the lock clicked open, she picked up her son once more. I don't want to go back in there. I'm so sorry they didn't tell you yet. I'm sure Emerson can help you clean up, if anything. If there's still some mess left. Goodbye, Pastor." With another uncomfortable smile, Ellen left the small chapel, leaving me with the keys and the burning fusion of curiosity and terror for what I'd find on the other side. After a short prayer, I pulled open the creaking door, met by torn police tape hastily strewn across the threshold. As I ducked underneath, the strong smell of iron stung his nose. I looked around at the cluttered office and was taken aback by the sight before me. By all accounts, most of the room was as one would expect for a small town pastor. Dusted bookshelves lined the walls, completely filled with all manner of different biblical translations and theological texts. A desk stood in the center of the room, still cluttered with planners, papers, and pens. In the middle of the room, however, was evidently the crime scene that Ellen had spoken about. A crater had formed in the middle of the floorboards, a hole warped and charred with as though something had ruptured from beneath the floor. Shards would litter the whole of the office, many of which burnt and splintered. Some even lodged into the ceiling above. Caked on the front of the desk, floor, and ceiling alike near the center of the room was a substantial splattering of dried blood. I stepped around the hole, my puzzled mind racing for any explanation. The only one I could muster, the one that I feared the most, lodged itself firmly in my brain as I made my way around the backside of the desk. An attack, a small-scale bombing directed at the previous pastor. I allowed himself one minor sin and swore under my breath, cursing my superiors for intentionally keeping these details from me so as not to scare me away from the position. As I looked over Pastor John's desk, I scanned the various documents. Many of them were obituaries, invitations to funerals from months prior. Clark had been right. It seemed death was a common happening in Pennell Crossing. I had been looking at the documents for several minutes before the picture on the desk caught my eye. The small framed photo, placed at the corner of the desk, seemed to be a photo of Pastor John with his family. Clinging to his leg was a small toddler, and at his other side was a loving wife, both of whom I recognized. I swore once more, frustrated at myself for not realizing earlier that Ellen and Micah were Pastor John's wife and son. Story 4, The Downward Arrow. I'm putting this together in my head. It's pretty messy up there right now, so I'm sorry if timelines get weird or things might not add up. I've lived in my house for 9 years and grew to be very good friends with the landlord, probably the most unbelievable part of the story. But it's true. He came to my wedding. The house has been in need of repairs for years, but COVID happened, and we got burned by not one, but 2 contractors. Finally, my wife and I decided this year to make an offer on the house. He agreed, but the house isn't in great condition and needs repairs. Without those, he's not getting the true value of the house. We agreed to have the repairs completed while we live here, as we know and recommended the contractors. It's a bit of a hassle, obviously, but it's fine, and the dog enjoys the company. All the electricity needs updated from knob and tube, old house. So most of the summer has been ripping open walls. Lots of progress, but I look like I live in the last 20 minutes of an A24 film. Here's where things get odd. My house is very close to the neighbors' houses. Not attached, but nothing but insects could get between them. The contractor comes to my office and says, "I need you to see something." She opened the wall to find a knob and tube electrical, but there's no wall. It's just the outside of my neighbor's house. There's a small bit of rotten installation, but cleared away. It looks like it might have been a window frame originally. Very odd, as the houses were built so close together no light gets between them. And who wants a window to look at dirty brick? It's fine, we have a laugh about it. None of us are good with the window theory though. And to move things along, after finding some strange old newspaper clipping and odd totems, we're all thinking it's some type of altar. The newspaper clippings are, well, weird. They're not whole articles, just clips, and they range from house fires to local hospital donations to even recipes. But again, it's not whole articles. It's just snippets. The totems are equally curious. An animal tooth with a twisty tie as a bow around it. A rook with a downward arrow carved badly into it. Some action figure. I think maybe a G.I. Joe with the face missing. I can't tell if it's due to time or shaved off. A minute hourglass with red sand. At this point, the whole house breathes at night. I mean, there's missing windows, holes in walls. It's to be expected. But that altar in the bathroom, it sounds like it actually breathes on nights where the air feels like still water in this heat. You can almost hear that room exhale. And then the couch incident happened. We can't move the couch. We move it all the time. It's not a heavy couch, but I drop my hat behind it, and all of a sudden, I can't move this couch. No one can. 4 of us can't. We came to the conclusion it's stuck on something, and we get to it when it's an actual problem. Right now, it isn't, and we need the walls closed up before cold weather hits. Well, I fell asleep watching TV 2 weeks ago, and woke up to my foot bleeding. A perfect circular chunk ripped out of my heel. I just figured it was my stupid ass getting my foot stuck on an exposed piece of wood. 3 nights later, I fall asleep again. I wake up to a pool of blood around my foot. 3 small gashes. I don't see anything I could have cut my foot on in sight. Last night, I wake up, blood all over the couch. My feet weren't even on the floor. I go to the weird altar bathroom to clean up. The scratch this time is deep in my left heel, and is a downward arrow like what was etched in the rook. I haven't told anyone. I put the pieces together today, and decided to just throw my thoughts on the internet. I don't know what to do or think. Sorry, this is ongoing. There's no closure or resolution here. Happy to answer any questions, and I'll update if it's warranted. Story 5. The Schrodinger Problem. I was locked in a box once, a few years back. There was a friend of mine, and we'll call him Ryan. A great guy, but also an advocate for admittedly dubious experiments, and I, at the time, wasn't exactly the smartest tool in the shed. As it happens, we were friends by convenience, both in college, sharing a dorm for the foreseeable future after things fell through with my last roommate. We met a few times at some of the parties thrown here and there, and whilst we largely run in the same circles, there had never been a point where we truly talked until getting a room together. Through the first month, I learned that he was a science major. At the time, I was still pursuing philosophy. You'd be surprised at how interesting the conversations can get. Most people don't tend to realize that philosophy covers a lot of the weird, muddy ground that science struggles to touch. Well, it happened at one point that we touched upon a topic that crosses rather perfectly into both. That is, of course, Schrodinger's cat. I won't summarize the topic, as it's a rather famous theoretical study that a simple Google search would get you answers for. We had a bunch of debates on the subject, not just what happens to the cat, but also what happens to the inside of the box or the poison, any number of potentialities that might grow from one singular decision. There were even whispered conversations, as we were afraid of being overheard, of a more humane experiment under the same concept. What we ended up doing was not at all humane. Ryan, despite being a great guy overall, has a bit of a drinking problem. It's never something I fully realized until after what we had done. That night was a party night. We'd just gotten past our midterms, and everyone was celebrating. I hadn't forsaken drinking entirely yet. That would only come after, so naturally I was right beside him as we shoved our way into some pompous rich kid's house. The idea sparked when the two of us were already swaying on our feet. It was a simple, stupid decision based largely around what we found in the guy's mom's medicine cabinet. A small vial with a ridiculous skeleton label, like a fucking cartoon trying to label something as poison as clearly as possible. Frankly, I'm surprised there wasn't a green spray of fumes when we opened the thing. Ryan was the one who said we should put it in a beer bottle and see who pukes first. As a joke, I suggested that one of us could lock ourselves in the bathroom with 2 beer cups, one laced with poison, the other free of it. Naturally, that's when Ryan saw the shed, one without any windows, and not a single person standing near it. I still remember those words. What if someone else does it, and we go in there together? Looking back, I realize how insane that sounds. But it doesn't matter, because that's exactly what we did. We poured the poison into an empty cup, and got one of Ryan's friends to pour it into one of our beers while we had our back turned. They must have thought we were playing some weird derivative game of guess the liquid. The night air was stark against my face, almost sobering. I remember that much. If only it had been sobering enough. There was dust and cobwebs in the shed. An old lawn mower was posted against the easternmost wall. An old tool shed stood opposite. As Ryan went to close the door, I noticed someone running across the lawn. But it didn't matter, because he grabbed his glass at the same moment I did mine. It felt like an eternity passed in that single unbroken moment before things began happening. The first, and the moment I remember the most, was a singular instance whereupon the lawnmower disappeared completely. There was nothing to take its place beyond this large, gaping hole. A hole upon which I saw the first eye, blinking in the same exact moment that Ryan dropped to the floor. My slightly drunken confusion was overtaken by horror as I turned towards my friend's writhing body, only to find him standing there, perfectly fine. He was looking toward me with a different expression of fear on his face as he took a step back, shouting something incoherent. I looked around wildly to try to find what he was staring at, only to find a single rusted lawnmower blade on the floor, stones with blood. The sound of gargling ricocheted to the confines of the shed as I was once again forced to stare at Ryan's perfectly fine, upright form. At this point, a headache was starting to brew underneath my eyelids when I fully realized that I wasn't standing in the shed anymore. In truth, I wasn't standing on anything, and there was Ryan some paces away, but his body was undulating, like river currents were sprouting and creasing his flesh, pushing back his skull in pulsating waves. I saw foam crash, bursting out his eyelids in horrid, slow-motion gurts. There were 10 billion fractures, all spiderwebbing out from his flesh, all of them sprouting into different versions of my friend, and almost all of them dying. I didn't see a choice. I took a deep breath and started running, desperately grasping at the straws of flesh that made up the monstrosity he was becoming. But each tear revealed a new layer, some fresh batch of gasping, wheezing, and bleeding. Never did there seem to be a single version of him that did not die in some horrific fashion. I regret what I did. In that moment, the fleshy form of Ryan and his 10 billion faces had grown to the point that it had fully overtaken whatever environment we existed in. So I grabbed hold of a tender bone, one whose death I knew as intimately as I did the earth under my feet. I picked a death that implicated me the least, one that would have happened in high school, before we'd ever gotten to know each other. When everything snapped into place, I was in the garage alone. The place where the lawnmower had been was still empty, still slithering and snaking with things that hurt my eye to see. I knew if I stayed it would spread, and spread enough to eat me alive. So I took a deep breath and opened the door. "You okay, man?" I can't remember how I answered that question. All I knew was that I was staring into the face of one of Ryan's friends, not mine. The worst part is that I can still hear him sometimes. And at night, I swear I can see his face bursting through the walls, with those wrangled and writhing limbs crawling from every surface they can connect to. Story 6. I've been stuck in my bedroom for the last 3 days. What I am about to tell you will sound crazy, but I need your help, so please read. 3 days ago, my parents and my older brother went to my cousin's wedding. Me and my brother are not very fond of parties or my extended family, but since he's the elder son, my parents always drag him along to family reunions. To endure these ordeals, he always takes his earbuds with him. Since we moved to our current home, about 10 years ago, things always went missing out of the blue: a key, a toy car, the TV controller, and there was no point in looking for the missing objects. We could search all over the house and never find them. Nowadays, when something goes missing, my father will say, "Forget it, and it will find its way back to you." And every time, without failure, he was correct, because after a couple days or weeks, sometimes entire months, the missing item will be found in an incredibly obvious location. Me and my family figured this was a normal occurrence, easily explained by healthy faults in our memories and so on. So we got used to it and lived normal lives. On that fateful day, my brother could not find his earbuds, so I said the words that our father had imprinted in our brains: "Forget it, and it will find its way back to you." He nodded in agreement and said, "Hopefully it will show up soon." My father and my mother were already waiting for him in the car. I said my farewells from the front door, and they left. I wish they didn't. I had spent that entire day reading Blood Meridian. In fact, I carried the book with me to the front porch, and as I was going back, I left the book on the dining table, to the right of the hallway that leads to my room. I sat down on my office chair and booted up my PC. I spent the rest of the evening playing video games. It was around 9 p.m. when I heard it. Thump, coming from the end of the hallway. The sound of a hardcover book hitting the wood floor. I figured it was my book. I must have left it in some awkward position on the table. I got up and opened the door of my bedroom. Then I saw it. A person, a creature, something about half my size, just finishing a small jump from the right of the hallway to the left, the book laid in the right, at the foot of the dining table. I was immediately paralyzed. I just stood there, like a deer in front of headlights. A pitch-black hand, with elongated, clawed fingers reached from the edge of the wall all the way to the other side of the hallway, grabbed the book, and quickly went into hiding. Slowly, the dark figure put its head out of the edge, and for a split second our eyes met. My heart was beating out of control. I was on the verge of puking as I hastily closed and locked my bedroom door. I heard footsteps approaching me. I broke down crying in a corner. It's been 3 days. No one is picking up on my calls. No one is answering my messages. My family has not returned. I hear inhuman sounds just outside my room. I see shadows moving, creeping in and out of what I hope is a familiar hallway. I'm too scared to look out the window. I'm thirsty and hungry. I'm not sure that this text will reach anyone, but I'm desperate. Please, find me. Story 7. I hate bullets, especially nuclear ones. You read that right. I was on my way to Knox, a small place in Obscurite. I was supposed to meet a client, so pretty weird cult summoning stuff. Well, I was supposed, but I couldn't get there on time. I was riding my car on a road in the forest. Then suddenly, a deer jumped right the way. Obscurite is full of that creatures. It just stared and glared at my car. My lights weren't on, but it still just stared. Then I saw a figure, humanoid. They had a gas mask and a red cape. They looked like they were standing there for years, with literal moss and ivy climbing up their legs and chests. There was a yellow glow behind the mask. Then they slowly raised a revolver, which was not in their hands a moment ago, and shot the deer. The deer started to scream and convulse violently, big chunks of meat falling from its body until there was only its skeleton. I knew what would probably happen next, so I ran over the deer and started driving the car as fast as I can. Nuclear bullets. Supernatural mercs definitely love those things. They would first make your body get destroyed in various horrible ways. Then you'll die, and your meat melts and turns into something horrible. Now, you're probably asking, how the hell do you know about these things? I'm kind of freelancer, but I specialize in the supernatural. Anyways, I was driving the car as fast as I could. Then I heard a loud thumping. Something just hit the roof of my car. Then it tore apart the roof of my car. As I looked up, I expected to see some horrid creature. And I was right. It looked like something out of Psycho's nightmare. No skin, no other organs, and a giant, disgusting mouth from the top of its head to its stomach, with 6 long arms with bones like chainsaws instead of hands. It was frightening, yes, but for someone who has done my job long enough, it really doesn't matter after some point. I hit the gas and prayed to find something to shoot this thing. And I found something, my trusty old shotgun. I mean, you need to be ready for things like these if you are into the supernatural. I aimed at the thing, which was trying to get inside my car now, and shot it multiple times. Now, normally, these things doesn't stay dead for long, so I just needed to distract it for long enough so I could get the hell out of this forest. And with some miracle it happened. I finally got off to a highway and started going to Knox. When I arrived at the hotel I booked, my client was not there. I asked the hotel staff, and they said someone came in my room earlier, then left. I rushed to my room, entered. AMD found a newspaper on my bed. Local journalist arrested for suspicious activities and the attempt to break in. Authorities claimed that the suspect was caught trying to break into an old storage building. The suspect is also in suspicions of cult activities. There's a handwritten note with red ink on the newspaper. Ave Imperatori. Story 8. I finally bought my dream apartment. Now the walls are moving and there's a breathing sound at night, but the landlord says I'm imagining it. In this world, a lot of things can drive me insane, and routine is the only anchor that eases my mind. For years, it was the only thing that kept me sane. Wake up at 6 a.m., gym by 6:30, work by 8:30, home by 6 p.m., dinner at 7 o'clock, in bed by 10 o'clock. A perfect, predictable, controllable loop. It was my shield against a world I felt was constantly trying to chew me up and spit me out. A world of soul-sucking jobs, parasitic landlords who saw me as a walking ATM, and banks that smiled while they bled you dry with interest rates. I had one goal, one single obsession that fueled my rigid existence. To buy my own place. Not just a home, but a fortress. A sanctuary where I was a king, where the rules were mine, and where no one could leech off me ever again. After a decade of scrimping, saving, and living a life devoid of any real pleasure, I did it. I bought my dream apartment. It cost me nearly everything I had, a small fortune that represented my entire youth. But it was worth it. A corner unit on the 14th floor of a sleek, modern building. Huge windows with a breathtaking view of the city skyline. It was my jewel, the culmination of my life's work. For the first 3 months, it was paradise. I would stand at the window in the evening, watching the city lights twinkle, and feel a profound sense of peace. I had finally made it. I was safe. That's what I thought. Anyway, until the breathing started. Because I live by such a strict routine, I noticed things, small changes, tiny deviations from the norm, and the first change was a sound. It would happen only when I was on the verge of sleep, in that quiet, vulnerable space between wakefulness and dream. It was a faint sound, so subtle I thought I was imagining it at first. A soft, slow inhale right by my ear. I'd jolt awake, my heart pounding, but the room would be silent. I'd write it off as the wind or the building's ventilation system, and eventually fall into a restless sleep. Then came the movement. I have a print hanging on the wall opposite my dining table. I eat at the same time every night, in the same chair. One evening, I noticed the print was slightly crooked. I got up, straightened it, and thought nothing of it. The next night, it was crooked again, tilted in the other direction. I started watching the walls as I ate, and I could swear if I unfocused my eyes just right, that I could see them flexing, a slow, almost imperceptible pulse, like the size of a giant lung. Things would fall, a book from a shelf, a fork from the kitchen counter. Never when I was looking, always when my back was turned. I'd just hear the clatter from the other room, a small, startling punctuation mark in the quiet of my evening. I was also starting to notice how empty the building was. For a new, high-end building, it was practically a ghost town. I rarely saw anyone in the hallways, never heard a neighbor through the walls. The only consistent presence was the building manager. He was an impeccably dressed man, always smiling a placid, empty smile. The odd thing was, I kept seeing him everywhere. I'd see him in the lobby as I left for work. And then a moment later, I'd see him again on the street corner, staring up at the building. I once saw him get into an elevator on the ground floor, and when the doors opened on my floor, a perfect copy of him got out. I shook my head, blamed it on lack of sleep, and hurried into my apartment. I wanted rational explanations. The breathing was my own heartbeat in my ears. The walls were the building settling. The falling objects were vibrations from the street below. But the explanation started to feel thin, stretched like a sheet pulled too tight over a monstrous shape. Soon, the phenomena grew too loud to ignore. The faint breathing in my ear at night became a wet, labored, choking sound, a desperate, rasping gasp for air that would jolt me from sleep, leaving me drenched in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I started dreading going to bed. Sleep, my sacred sanctuary that renews my sanity, became a nightly ordeal. The movement of the walls became undeniable. It was a slow, deep, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation. During the day, it was almost soothing, but at night, in the dark, it was horrifying. My apartment was breathing around me. The pictures on the walls would sway. The floorboards would groan and shift under my feet. The whole structure felt organic, alive. I saw my routine getting destroyed in front of me. I realized my fortress is being conquered as I just watched. My life was no longer a predictable loop. It was a waking nightmare. I was perpetually exhausted, irritable, paranoid. I had to do something. I went to the building manager, the smiling man who was everywhere at once. I found him in his small, neat office off the main lobby. "There's something wrong with my apartment," I said, my voice tight with a week's worth of sleepless anxiety. "The walls are moving. There are sounds." He just looked at me with that same placid, unreadable smile. His eyes were like polished stones. "Sir, this is a brand new building. State-of-art construction. I assure you it's perfectly sound." "No, you don't understand," I insisted, my voice rising. "It's breathing. I hear it at night. It's keeping me awake." He leaned back his chair, the smile never wavering. "You look tired, son," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Perhaps you're just overworked. Stress from work, maybe. It happens. Get some rest. I'm sure everything will seem normal in the morning." His condescending calm, his utter dismissal, it infuriated me. But what could I do? Argue with him? Tell him his building was a living creature? He'd have me evicted for being insane. My next stop was a real estate broker who sold me the place, the man who had shaken my hand and congratulated me on my wise investment. I found him in his swanky downtown office. The moment he saw me, his friendly, Professional demeanor faltered. A flicker of something. Thought it was fear, or recognition crossed his face before he smoothed it over. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a little too bright. "You sold me the apartment on the 14th floor," I said, closing the office door behind me. "We need to talk." I told him everything. The breathing, the moving walls, the smiling manager who seems to exist in multiple places at once. As I spoke, the color drained from the broker's face. He started sweating, fiddling with a pen on his desk, refusing to meet my eyes. "Look," he stammered when I was finished. I'm sure it's just the stress of a new home. These big buildings, they make noises." "Stop lying to me," I snarled. I could feel the control, the rigid discipline I'd built my life on, cracking and splintering. "You know something. I can see it on your face. What did you sell me?" "It's a prime piece of real estate," he said, his voice weak, reciting the sales pitch like a prayer. "Great investment. Fantastic view." That's when I snapped. The sleep deprivation, the constant fear, the quiet gaslighting. It all erupted in a wave of pure rage. I lunged across the desk, grabbed him by the collar of his expensive shirt, and slammed him back against his chair. His eyes went wide with terror. "My life is ruined." I screamed, my face inches from his. "My routine is gone. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't think. I have nothing left to lose. So you're going to tell me what the hell is going on, or I swear to God, I will kill you right here in this ridiculous chair." The threat was real. I meant it. In that moment, I was a cornered animal, and I didn't care about anything but getting an answer. He broke. Tears streamed down his face. He started blubbering, the words tumbling out in a panicked, incoherent stream. "I'm sorry. I had to. He made me." "Who made you?" I roared, shaking him. "The manager, the landlord. He's not human," the broker sobbed. "The building, it's a nest, a breeding ground." "What are you talking about?" "The apartments," he gasped, his eyes wild with terror I was starting to understand. "They're not apartments. They're eggs, each one, and they need sustenance. They feed on the life of the person inside, on their energy, their essence, their routine. It breathes you in day after day. The wet, choking sound in my ear, the feeling of being drained. It all clicked into a horrifying, impossible sense. It feeds until what? I whispered, my rage turning to ice. The broker looked at me, his face a mask of pure, abject horror. "Until it hatches," he whimpered. "I don't know what comes out. I swear I don't know. That was the deal. I find him a new tenant, and I never have to find out." I let him go. He slumped in his chair, a weeping, pathetic mess. I walked out his office. My mind was in shock. An egg. I was living inside an egg, and it was about to hatch? The idea itself seemed funny. I went back to the building. I didn't know what else to do. I had to face him. I walked into the manager's office without knocking, and I found him. He wasn't alone. The office was filled with chairs, and in every single chair sat a perfect, identical copy of the building manager. There must have been 20 of them. They all had the same placid smile, the same polished stone eyes. They all turned their heads in perfect, silent unison to look at me as I entered, and then my mind just realized and all its walls crumbled down. My legs gave out. I collapsed to my knees on the plush carpet. "What do you want from me?" I cried with a broken voice. All of them spoke at once, their voices merging into a single smooth, impossibly resonant chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once. "We want nothing. The deal has been made. You signed the contract. You bought the apartment. The deed is a bond, a promise. The vessel belongs to the occupant, and the occupant belongs to the vessel. Please," I begged, "let me go. I'll give it back. I'll give you everything." "You cannot leave," the chorus of voices replied, the placid smiles unwavering. "It is bound to you now. It will continue to feed, no matter where you go. It is almost time. You've been a most nutritious tenant, so full of order, so much delicious energy to consume. The thought of what was gestating inside my walls, nourished by my own life force, made me want to vomit. So that's it? Wait to die, wait for it to hatch. The many identical faces tilted in unison. A flicker of something that was not a smile touched their lips. There's always a choice, the voice said. The bond can be transferred. The deed can be reassigned. What do you mean? Well, the chorus whispered, leaning forward as one. You find a replacement, a new source of nourishment, a new occupant to see the process through to its conclusion. Become a broker for us. Find someone to take your place. And you will be free. Free to never know what your apartment will hatch. And so here we are. I accepted their offer. Of course. What other choice did I have? I'm writing this post from a new office, a nice one with a great view. My old apartment is pristine, clean, and empty, waiting. The breathing has stopped, for me at least. I can sleep again. My routine is back. My life is my own, and all it cost me was my soul. This story, the one you've just read, it's not a confession. It's not a cry for help. It's an advertisement. I know you. You, the person reading this late at night. You're like me. You love these stories. You love the thrill, the mystery, the brush with the abyss. You seek out the darkness. You're not afraid of things that go bump in the night. You're fascinated by them. So I'm offering you a unique opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to not just read a horror story, but to live one. I have an apartment for sale. A beautiful corner unit on the 14th floor. State-of-art, motivated seller. I can get you a fantastic price. It's an immersive experience, a home with real character, a place that truly becomes a part of you. It's waiting for its next occupant. It's getting hungry. Are you interested? The key is waiting. Story 9. The old lady next door might have drugged my cat. It's 3 in the morning and I can't sleep. For the past hour or so I've been laying in bed trying to ignore the soft, frantic scrabbling of tiny claws with an occasional thump mixed in. These noises are a little easier to ignore than the muffled sobbing coming to the wall from the apartment next door. God, I hope that's not because of me. Sweet Pea has never been the most energetic cat. She's usually curled up in front of the hall closet napping, when she isn't giving me judgmental stares from around the doorway. I don't know how such a small creature can be so haughty, somehow looking down a nose only 4 inches from the floor. She didn't even run around the place when we first moved in a couple of months ago. Something must have happened to her today, and I think I might know what it was. Earlier today, when I had just gotten home from work, I found the door unlocked. Inside, I found a diminutive older woman who appeared to be dressed as a rodeo clown's lawyer, crouching down over Sweet Pea with a small plastic bag of handmade treats. I'm sure to most people something like that might be shocking, an event that joins reliable old party stories like the time I thought my dog was a pile of laundry for decades to come. But for me, it was just Thursday. My landlord, Ruth, has a little issue with boundaries. She's the kind of woman who, in theory, might be lovely to be around in tiny doses. She brings over trays of delicious homemade pastries and cookies that always seem to disappear faster than you think should be possible. She listens to you talk with eyes open wide, bulging behind her thick rhinestone-rimmed glasses, heart open even wider. But it was the 3rd time this week I had come home to find her in my apartment. The 3rd time this week a surprise social interaction was sprung on me when all I wanted to do was kick off my customer service voice at the door and not think about how one day a robot will be able to talk to people better than I do. God damn it, Ruth. Why are you here when I'm not? She jolted upright with a cry like an extinct bird's mating call, knocking the single dining room chair over with her prodigious backside. Sweet Pea tore out of the kitchen like her ass was on fire, bringing down a tower of old pizza boxes in an uncontrolled demolition. Ruth sheepishly kicked a couple of pizza bones into a pile and swiped surprisingly steady hands down the front of her neon fuchsia pantsuit as she hit me with the full force of her $50,000 smile. The cacophonous rattling of her many plastic arm bangles was drowned out by her voice, as soft as a buzzsaw and twice as loud. Oh, Darling, I thought I would just poke my head in and tidy up a tad. And then I couldn't just not say hello to Sweet Pea. Oh, isn't she just a darling? You know, I had one just like her, except he only had 3 legs. This was way back in... Oh, yes, I think it was Dash. You can't keep coming in here when I'm not home, Ruth. Well, why not? It's my gosh darn building. I'm here offering my services at no extra charge. To boot, I cook, I clean. I'm pretty nifty with a screwdriver and hammer. I can conversate with the best of them. Heck, just the other day, Dash. It's against the law? The law. She threw her head back and cackled deeply, lime green fingernails clutching at her midsection as she leaned back against the sink. Well, according to Johnny Law, you're just a friend who stays over a lot and helps with the light bill sometimes. I know you don't mean it anyhow. You know if you tell me to get up, I'll just up and skedaddle. Come on now, Jack. I'm just trying to make a connection. You like me, don't you, Jack? I just want to help my tenants. What's so gosh darn bad about that? Look, the sink is absolutely crawling with ants. This place could sure as heck fire use a woman's touch every now and then. I stormed over the faucet and opened the hot water handle full blast, swiftly and decisively washing the horde of tiny, squirming bugs down the drain. In a way, I felt bad for them. They were just living their little lives, oblivious that in an instant I would decide to wash it all away. Ruth was silent as I enacted my ant genocide, and when I turned around afterwards, she wore a strange expression I couldn't place on her pinched, leathery face. I thought I was being a bit harsh at the time, but sometimes you kind of have to be to get your damn alone time. There, no more ants. No more ants. No more Ruth. Get the fuck out. Please. If I had hurt her feelings, she recovered quickly, once again blinding me with a smile far too big for her face. Getting hit with that at point blank is like realizing the light at the end of the tunnel is a reflection of your flashlight on a sleek metal cowcatcher bearing down on you. I can tell you're having a tough day, darling, so I'll get out of your hair. The last thing I want is you closing yourself off to me like some of the other tenants. I'll be back another time when you're ready to grab a bag and a broom. Please give Sweet Pea my love, and tell her she's the prettiest most Dash. Sometimes I have to end her sentences for her. So I cut her off there with a winning smile of my own, one forged through many years of serving the public. For maximum effect, I squinted my eyes the same way she did. Most people subconsciously enjoy being mirrored. It makes them feel like they're not alone. Okay, thanks, Ruth, bye. I shouted as I shooed her away from the door, and finally she began trundling her way to the elevator. Her thick, square heels pretend her looming approach, and I pictured the townspeople shuddering their shades in fear that she may darken their doorstep. Before I could flee to the safety of my nest, I turned around to see my neighbor from the other side of the apartment. Darla, though she had a smirk on her mouse-of face and a bottle of whiskey in her hands, I could also see that her little black t-shirt was inside out and her mascara was running. Hey, Jagoff, I see you just survived Hurricane Ruth. Want to forget your troubles? She tilted her head and looked up at me with bright blue eyes that were swimming as her chipped nails played a beat on the glass bottle. I knew that turning her down would just have her crying and throwing things at the wall all night. And I was so tired, I almost did anyways. I figured with any luck, she would be passed out on the couch in 20 minutes, and I could finally get to relaxing. Today is just not my lucky day. If she had any comments about the state of my apartment, she mercifully kept them to herself, collapsing into the couch like a crumbling ruin as she eagerly unscrewed the bottle. We didn't talk much, thankfully, merely passing the bottle back and forth as we stared blankly at the flickering glow of the TV. Something was clearly bothering her, but she didn't want to say, and I didn't want to ask. In a way, it was nice to let all of my thoughts slide out of my head like a cracked egg and just exist. Eventually, the bottle ran dry. Then the unopened bottle of rum I had stashed in the back of the cabinet ran dry, too. I don't remember what we said as she stumbled out the door. As my hand fell from the knob and I turned around, I thought I saw her Keurig sitting on the coffee table. In retrospect, perhaps the way I threw open the door was a bit dramatic, but whatever I had been planning to say was shocked out of me when I saw Darla was still standing there. I turned to look inside to restart my train of thought, but the bare top of the table gave me nothing. In hindsight, I had probably been looking at a giant cockroach with my bleary eyes the first time. When I turned back to look at her, my swimming mind once again struggled to convey anything. It's supposed to be my job to communicate with people. It was downright shameful. Whatever I had been trying to communicate, she got a different signal. I won't bore you with the details. For my sake, more than yours. The only pertinent ones are that it was unfortunately short. I'm a bit out of practice, it seems. And that she was never out of my sight the whole time. Well, we both had our eyes closed for most of it. But you get what I mean. She was probably thinking of someone else, too. When we were finished, I made the worst mistake of all. I tried to be funny. Hey, try not to forget your keys this time. I think I was setting up some lame pun, but I never got that far. She burst into tears and immediately started grabbing her clothes, turning her face away as I tried to explain. No, wait, I wasn't saying you should leave. I just dash. She cut me off with a harsh hand gesture, still facing away. Her reply came in a warbling, artificially cheery voice. No, I know that. I just suddenly remembered S something, and I have to go check on it right now. She sniffled loudly and pulled her clothes on with jerky motions, slowly making her way toward the door. Just before she walked out, she turned and did her level best at a smile that looked like a chalk sidewalk drawing a downpour. This was, nice. Maybe we can hang another time. Sorry I made it so weird. She was out the door before I could correct her, and it wasn't a full minute before I heard her softly crying through the wall. It was getting pretty late by that point, so I filled up Sweet Pea's bowl, only briefly stopping to note that she hadn't immediately come sauntering up to judge me through half-lidded eyes and headed to bed. I should have probably checked her litter box, but I was exhausted, and had a pretty good idea that Ruth had made it her first stop. I haven't seen Sweet Pea all night, since I caught Ruth feeding her homemade treats. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoes to the wall, followed by several impacts of smashing glass. I ate up motionless in bed for long seconds, struggling to listen for any signs of life over the maddening scrabbling coming from my kitchen. My heart races a mile a minute as I slowly climb out of bed. Taking a step toward the wall I share with Darla, I almost jump clear out of my skin when a crashing sound rings out from my kitchen. Sweet Pea must have knocked over a mug. I cross the distance to the wall swiftly, leaving behind a string of mumbled curses I'd rather not repeat here. I press my ear to the wall to listen for signs of life from next door, but that only seems to amplify the frantic scratching sounds, the wall somehow picking up the vibrations. Eventually I hear the sobbing pick up again, and I breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not going to say she's okay, but at least she's alive over there. The door in my bedroom makes a soft clicking noise when I turn the handle, and the scratching sounds immediately stop. Swallowing hard, I open the door and slowly step into the silent stillness. I had forgotten to turn the TV off, and the input screen bathes the room in a cool blue, casting harsh shadows across the discarded cardboard and half-empty plastic bags. The room is as still as you always hope a grave will be. The compressor in the AC kicks on, and a small styrofoam cup clatters to the floor, making my eyes dart to the sink. On the floor below, the tiny white cup lazily rolls back and forth in a small field of shiny ceramic shards. The air from the vent must have knocked over the styrofoam, but the mug? Sweet Pea knows better than to run around on the counter. I'm tempted to leave the mess for later, but I know I'll be stepping in it when I make my morning coffee. Plus, it could be dangerous to the 8-pound cat that lives in the bottom half-foot of my apartment. I was walking past the sink to grab the broom when I heard the light creak of a stealthy step on a loose laminate floor tile. When I turn to look, I see a dark shape dart out of view under the couch and instinctively take a step back, holding the scream by biting my lip almost as deep as the shards of my favorite mug bite into my heel. The mess can wait. I need to get a hold of that goddamn cat before she gives me a heart attack. I want to go pluck the broken chunks of ceramic in the bathroom, but for some reason I can't bring myself to walk past the sofa. Sweet Pea? Come on, girl, come out. I feel stupid calling to her like that, especially as the silence that answered hangs heavily in the air. She's as likely to come when I call as she is to climb up onto my lap. We just don't have that kind of relationship. I hoped that at least she would move or something, give me some indication that she was alive. Anxiety digs its long fingers deep into the back of my skull and squeezes my mind tight As I struggle to dismiss the dark thoughts hemming me in, she's just acting weird. Maybe she caught that roach I saw earlier and doesn't want to talk with her mouth full. Maybe the mug had landed on her head and she lay dying under the couch right now, gray sludge trickling down the sides of her tiny face as she watches what's supposed to be her caretaker tremble in fear and do nothing. I take a deep breath in to calm my nerves, and almost immediately I can feel the grip of anxiety loosen. Being careful not to bump the shrapnel in my heel, I slowly lower myself to the floor to peer underneath the couch. I should have turned on the light. It's pitch black under there and cluttered with old plastic wrappers and long-lost socks. Jesus, I need to clean up a bit sometime. I know it's been getting bad. I know I have to clean it up at some point, but I just never seem to have the energy. Putting on the fake smile voice all day to deal with entitled rich assholes is exhausting. By the time I get home, I just want to sink into the sofa and forget about the day. Crawling toward the couch on my hands and knees, I think I see movement. So I lean down and stick my arm under, turning my face away to reach further toward the back. As my fingers probe into dusty cobwebs and forgotten pieces of discarded food, I think I hear a rustle and call out to her again, getting real tired of this pee. She responds with a soft growling whine, somehow coming from in front of me. I turn my head and see her tense body crouched in the darkness under the coffee table. Did she sneak around behind me when I was bending down to reach in the couch? Before I can react, she thunders past my face like a woolly freight train, scattering trash and stray hairs like a smoke bomb. She streaks down the hall and around the corner, yowling and hissing the whole way. I hear her collide with the door as I shoot to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my heel to sprint after her as the sounds of her own struggle intensify. I round the corner to the sound of a dull thud that precludes a heavy silence and come to a sudden halt. The door to the hall closet is open. I don't know how long I was standing there, but the thought of Sweet Pea laying on the floor with a broken neck, an accusatory glare with vacant eyes, snaps me out of it, and I step into the threshold. The closet looks just as I remember, with one small difference. A small cardboard box has fallen off the shelf and lays slanted in the corner. The side that was labeled as facing away, but I don't need to see it to know which box it is. I don't even realize I've been slowly backing away until a shard of ceramic embedded in my heel makes contact with the baseboard in the hallway, sending a bright bolt of pain up my spine that snaps me out of my daze. I realize now that the perfect silence has been broken as a low growl emanates from just underneath me. I can't begin to describe the relief I feel when I look down and see Sweet Pea hunched at my feet, staring into the darkness of the hall closet. I swiftly close the closet door and bend down to pick her up, wincing as the pain in my leg begins to really make itself at home. Surprisingly, she doesn't complain as I escort her to the bathroom for first aid. I'm not a vet, but as far as I can tell she has no injuries, save for one small patch of fur missing on her flank. I assume that's from running into the closet door, so hard it popped open. Her eyes are clear and alert, and she hasn't had any more episodes the whole time I was pulling shards of coffee cup out my foot. My best guess is she had a reaction to something in the treat Rue fed her earlier. God only knows what the hell it's made of, and it seems to have worn off. If I see any other strange behaviors tomorrow, I'll get her looked at, but for now I'm eager to put this night behind me. On the way out of the bathroom, I pause at the hall closet and, without turning a look, gently turn the small lock on the handle. Maybe Sweet Pea can sleep in my bedroom tonight. Just this once. Story 10. The numbers under my light switches keep going down. I moved into this apartment 3 months ago. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom on the top floor of an older building. The rent was low, the neighborhood was quiet, and it was a short walk to work. The place had high ceilings, old wooden floors, and windows that let in the morning light in a way that almost made it feel warm here. For the first few weeks, it felt normal. The first odd thing happened on a Sunday afternoon while I was cleaning the kitchen. I was wiping down the counters when I noticed something under the light switch faint, like it had been written with a fine black marker. Just a number. 42. Small. Right where the switch plate met the wall. I figured it was from the previous tenants. A builder's note. Maybe. I didn't think much of it until a few days later, when I saw another number in the hallway. 39. Different room. Same handwriting. Same placement. A week later, I found another one in the bathroom. 36. That's when I started noticing the pattern. The numbers were going down, always in increments of 3. I mentioned it to a friend after work. He laughed and said it sounded like some kind of bad horror movie countdown. Probably leftover from a renovation, he said. I wanted to believe him. But the handwriting didn't look like a quick scribble from a contractor. It was neat, almost careful. Over the next 2 weeks, I checked every switch in the apartment. I found more numbers. 33 in the bedroom, 30 in the living room. Every one was written in the same neat style, small enough to miss unless you look closely. Then one night, I walked into the kitchen and froze. I could have sworn the number there had been 42 when I moved in. Now it read 27. I told myself I'd remembered wrong. To be sure, I took photos with my phone. The next morning, the photo still showed 42. But on the wall, the number was 24. That's when I started keeping a log. Every morning, I checked each switch and wrote the numbers down. Without fail, they dropped by 3 overnight. 3 days later, the hallway switch was down to 15. That's when I noticed something else. I wear a smartwatch that tracks my sleep. Out of curiosity, I compare my log to my sleep data. The night the hallway switch said 15, my watch showed I had been up and moving at exactly 1:15 a.m. I don't remember getting out of bed. The next night, the living room switch went from 15 to 12. My watch showed movement at 12:12 a.m. That same night. A glass I'd left in the sink was sitting on the counter in the morning. I live alone. At work, I found it hard to focus. I'd be halfway through an email and catch myself staring at my hands, wondering what they'd been doing while I slept. I started drinking more coffee than usual just to get through the day. My co-workers noticed. One of them asked if I was okay. I told her I'd been having trouble sleeping. I didn't tell her why. One night, I tried to stay awake. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, watching videos on my phone. I remember seeing the clock hit 12:05. I blinked and it was 1:14 a.m. My phone was on the table. My legs felt heavy, my mouth was dry, and I was sitting in a slightly different position. The numbers kept dropping. By the time the kitchen switch hit 6, I felt like I was constantly on edge. I kept the TV on for background noise, but the apartment still felt too quiet, like the walls were listening. 2 nights ago, I decided to record myself. I propped my phone against the hallway wall so I could see the kitchen and hallway switches. I went to bed with the covers pulled tight, heart pounding. I woke up at 3:48 a.m. on the couch. I don't remember walking there. My phone wasn't where I left it. I found it on my nightstand. The video file was there, but when I tried to play it, it was corrupted black screen, no sound. That morning, the kitchen switch said 3. I spent the rest of the day avoiding the apartment. I walked around the city aimlessly until the sun went down, drinking coffee just to have somewhere to sit. I didn't want to be here when it hit 0. Tonight is the last night. Every switch in the apartment now reads 0, except the one in my bedroom. That one says 1. I've locked the front door. Every light is on. My watch says it's 11:54 p.m. I'm sitting on my bed, staring at the bedroom switch. If the pattern is real, it will happen at 1 a.m. My chest feels tight. I keep glancing at the door, then the switch, then the clock. My ears strain for every sound, but the building is silent except for the hum of the lights. 12:15 a.m. My eyes keep drifting to hallway. 12:32 a.m. I thought I heard something shift out there, like fabric against the wall. 12:50 a.m. My mouth is dry. I keep telling myself to stay put, but my legs feel restless, like they're waiting for something. Tonight, I've left every light on. I'm sitting in the hallway because it's the brightest place when everything else wants to go dark. I hear nothing. I hear everything. I know I'll stand up soon, even if I don't know why. I know I'll place my hand on the wall where the numbers were. Even though there's nothing there now, and I know that in the silence, I'll hear that same soft, patient sound again, the one that never tries to scare me. It just waits until I decide to count, or stop,